Amidst the Israel-Hamas war going on for more than a month now, Israel has slammed 4 international media outlets: the New York Times, CNN, the Associated Press and Reuters over the conduct of 4 photojournalists in Gaza, saying they had advanced knowledge of the attack by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October that killed more than 1,400 people. The news services strongly rejected the Israeli government's accusation they had any forewarning of the impending murderous assault, with the New York Times saying that the outrageous charges endangered journalists in both Israel and Gaza. This episode has left the Firangi media busted, raising serious ethical questions as to why journalists were accompanying Hamas terrorists. We'll talk about this with our guests. Let me introduce them, and of course we'll also give you some insights into who these journalists are. Joining us on the show is Major General Sudhakar Ji, VSM veteran, geopolitical, strategic and defense expert. Mr. Sandeep Chachra, human rights defender, joining us on the program as well. Mr. Arjun Hardas is also here with us. He's joining us as the India representative of the American Jewish Committee. Last but not the least, Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, also with us on the program. I'm going to go to the big screen and try and tell you who these people are and what this matter is completely all about. So we are calling it Washington Post's hit job. Suspect number 1 is Hassan Islaya. He's a photographer who works with the Associated Press and CNN. He's showing ransacking of an Israeli tank on the 7th of October. He was photographed with Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, who is of course a wanted person at this point in time. That shows you the proximity as well. This was the image taken by Islaya of the Israeli tank burning on the 7th of October. If he's working with the Associated Press and CNN, how is he in such close proximity with these Hamas terrorists? Infiltrating Palestinians near the Gaza Strip fence on the 7th of October. He was toe-to-toe with them. And suspect number 2 is Ali Mahmoud. He's a photographer who works as a freelancer for CNN, AP, Reuters and the New York Times. Hamas terrorists transfer body of Shani, and that's the photograph that was taken by this particular photographer, once again showing that there was absolute proximity to what the terrorists were doing and what these photographers were doing very close to them. Did they have first-hand knowledge of what was going to happen? Were they in close proximity to some of these people who were planning this attack is something that we are also contemplating. Yusuf Masood, photographer for CNN, AP, Reuters and the New York Times. He's taken pictures of Hamas terrorists using weapons, and this of course was all done on the 7th of October. He's also shown abductions of Israelis being taken into Gaza on the 7th of October. The big question that comes to mind is that how were they close to this action if it was unplanned or if it was sporadic? Suspect number 4, Hatem Ali, who's another photographer. He's showing kidnapped Israelis being taken to Gaza, and he's also of course under the lens for being close to the Hamas. Photojournalists working with international media have joined in covering acts of murders. That's not what they're doing. This is what Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu has enunciated at this point in time. Of course, this is a massive charge. Journalists were accomplices in crimes against humanity is what we're learning at this point in time as well. So were these newspapers, these outlets, facilitating some sort of a sensationalism to get the latest news so they could get the numbers? Their actions were contrary to the professional ethics that they have sworn by. And of course, this is unbecoming of any journalist. An urgent letter has been issued to the bureau chiefs of these media organizations demanding explanations and how come these photographers had proximity to the Hamas when these attacks were taking place. They also go on to show and say that we sought clarifications and demanded urgent actions be taken against these photojournalists, and the official responses were something like this. The New York Times shot back saying that the accusation that New York Times knew about Hamas attacks is untrue and absolutely outrageous. They also went on to say that it's reckless to make such allegations, putting the journalists in Gaza and Israel at a very high risk. Times has covered, in fact, the 7th October attacks with fairness and impartiality. But it also does not talk about why these photographers had such access. Vague allegations made about freelance journalists in Gaza, and our review of Yusuf's work shows what photojournalists always do and where they always go. We speak in defense of freelance photojournalists in conflict areas. Well, they are supporting this journalist, but they're not trying to give a clear validation as to how come these journalists had such quick and close access to some of these images and some of these harrowing tales that came out perhaps within the first 1 or 2 hours of this dastardly attack. Reuters also shot back in defense, saying that we are aware of a report and accusations against 2 freelance photographers that were made against the outlet. They contributed to the Reuters coverage of the 7th October attack, is what Reuters is saying at this point in time. We categorically deny any prior knowledge of the attack, and we categorically, of course, do not endorse what is being said. We reject the embedding journalists with the Hamas on the 7th of October. So this is the response which has come through Reuters. We acquired photographs from 2 Gaza freelance photographers, and that's all we did. But how did these photographers have these photographs so quickly is a question that Reuters need to ask them as well. These photographs were published by Reuters, were taken 2 hours after the Hamas attack. Well, that cannot be verified so easily, but the fact of the matter is that some of these images from what we saw also describe and also show that they were taken immediately after the attacks took place. Photos were taken 45 minutes after the attack, is what Reuters said. CNN goes on to clarify as well, saying that we are aware of the article and the photo, considering Hassan Islai, the suspect number 1 that we talked about. The freelance journalist has worked with international outlets for a very long time. So basically, this is a statement in his defense. We have not at this point in time found any reason to doubt that the journalist is lacking any kind of accuracy. We have decided to suspend all ties with him at this point in time, is what CNN has said, but this does not really in fact absolve them if that particular journalist was involved with Hamas or not. Associated Press said that we had no knowledge. Hassan has been on occasional freelance basis for our wire service, is what Associated Press has said. Again, most of the outlets saying that they had no idea if this was a premeditated nexus between these journalists or whether this was something which was done out of a free journalistic spirit. The role of AP is to gather information on breaking news events, and that's exactly what these journalists did. But the Israelis have a reason to believe, a firm reason to believe, that this was something which can be investigated upon. Professor Nalapat, I'll begin with you. So you're a journalist, I'm a journalist. It's a very serious charge that Israel is making, that these photojournalists had something to do with this attack, or rather had prior knowledge of this attack. And also this goes on to show that, if you are getting these pictures at such a rate and with such speed, there has to be, and if you're based out of Gaza, there has to be some connection with the Hamas for you to get such exclusive footage and pictures. What is your thought on this, sir?
Well, we have been discussing the fact that on the info war front, Israel frankly has been doing very badly, and Hamas has been doing much better than Israel in presenting a narrative which is absolutely flawed, and it goes against logic, but they have presented it in a very, very effective way, and essentially till now they've been winning the info war. I want to ask you, Vineet, that was a very remote corner of both Israel as well as Gaza. I mean, you may find an occasional, let's say, a bunch of goats or something moving there or something like that. But overall, that area was largely uninhabited. Now, do you mean to tell me that entirely coincidentally, the photographers, 3 or 4 top photographers of Gaza, the people who basically are relied upon by international networks, such as the New York Times, Associated Press, CNN, such top international publications, all of them miraculously landed up in that remote spot at this same point in time, that the attack took place in the morning? Didn't they have something better to do? Did they? The fact is, it is very obvious that prior knowledge that something was happening. Perhaps they were not told some of the details, but they could have guessed. Having lived there, they could have put two and two together purely by looking at the individuals who have told them this information, what the issue was. And clearly they did nothing about it. I'm not saying that they informed their editors in advance. Certainly, I'm sure none of the editors of AP or CNN or New York Times or any of these other publications had any inkling from these photographers. But the fact that they were there at that spot, that remote spot, at the very point in time of this particular attack, to be fair, to logic, Vineet, it defies logic to say that this was a coincidental action. Very clearly, they were briefed in advance as to something is going to happen, and possibly they were briefed by something more than just saying something going to happen, because that is not enough to bring a photographer whose photographs are carried by such international news outlets to come all the way to some remote corner of Gaza for some kind of a chance. He will not take a chance. So clearly they were informed something significant is going to happen, and they would have. It's not difficult to put two and two together. Almost anybody who has studied mathematics can count two plus two. And that's all you need to understand, that when Hamas tells you something is going to happen, they don't mean that they're going to distribute candy and flowers. It means that they're going to indulge in an act of terror. So, Vineet, quite frankly, it's very obvious that they knew, and it's equally obvious they did not tip off anybody who could have tipped off the innocent civilians who were on the other side and who lost their lives as a result of this October 7 terror attack.
Absolutely. Arjun, what do you make of this? This is obviously, if you put two into two together, there's definitely something to ponder over and rather investigate over.
Thanks, Vineet. Yeah, it's pretty obvious that they, as Professor Malapat mentioned, that they had some inclination. But one must, to go on a limb here and take the devil's advocate here, is that you've seen the situation here sometimes in our own troubled areas, such as Kashmir, etc., where journalists have to survive to keep a balance on both sides, keep contacts with both sides, with the security forces, as well as some of the militants are also known to them. The troubling problem here is, and I'll tell you this because I have been to Gaza. As a matter of fact, when I worked with NewsX, I did go to Gaza, and I was hosted, so to say, by a stringer, an Arab citizen of Gaza, who worked for, I think, the ABC at that point as a stringer. Now, the problem is, where do you draw that line? About when you know something is going to happen, obviously they wanted a tip-off, they wanted coverage. The journalists provided that coverage. What do? Do you inform and risk your life? Gaza is not a democratic state. Do they have that fear about that if there is some indication that these people have spoken to somebody outside, to New York or whatever it is, or to headquarters, and they'll be killed off? The troubling problem here is that is one balance which can be debated over within the journalist circles globally. The troubling problem here is you do your job, you balance it out fine. You do this, you do that, that's fine. That's one side of it. But that photograph of this fellow, of this journalist hugging Sinwar, and everybody knows who Sinwar is. It's not that they don't know who he is. Hugging Sinwar, and then there is also a short video of him on I think it looks like the back of a motorcycle, driving with a grenade in his hand. That is where it becomes a little more troubling. They're pretty much clear that he is not a balanced person. That is where the biggest problem happens. Now, under those circumstances, is he on their side? Is he helping out the Hamas beyond his professional responsibilities? And all bunch of them, for that matter, not just this guy. Some of the photographs will come out. Do they know? Maybe they were just compartmentalized. Okay, be ready. Something big is going to happen. We don't know what. We can't tell you what, but be ready. They should have been, and as stringers, they should have at least informed headquarters, as Professor Nalapat said, that we have been told that there is something big happening. We don't know what it is. They're not giving us the details. But just to let you know, be ready. It's a Saturday morning, whether it's in Israel for Shabbat or in New York as a weekend. The journalists have to keep their editors informed. that, okay, something big is going to happen. That's what we have been told. We don't know what it is, but just be ready for some breaking news as and when it happens. But they didn't.
No, I'm sorry, Arjun, they were told the location as well, clearly, because they ended up in that location.
Okay. Yeah, they were told that as well. They did not pass on that information. That is a professional failure as well, besides a personal one. So I don't give them a free pass on this. Not as human beings. They should have something. Maybe they don't have to inform the Israelis about it, but at least inform their editors. Let the editors take a call that keep out of this. We think it's not worth it. Whatever it is, they didn't do it.
Mr. Chatra, you're familiar with the situation. You're familiar with the challenges that some of these journalists may also face in Gaza. But, they had a moral obligation to inform someone. And from what we have shown and from what I have enunciated at the beginning of the show in my opening monologue, it becomes very, very pragmatically clear that they had an inkling of what was to come.
Thank you for having me here. And before I come to my views, I think I must mention, I'll be failing if I don't, that there's a dire and a compelling need to ensure ceasefire. A dire and a compelling need to stop killings. I mean, more than 13,000 lives have been lost. Killings have been done, 1,400 or so. Numbers are not the only issue, but we have 13,000 lives lost, 11,500 of Palestinians, children, women, and so on and so forth, 1,400 or so of Israelis. The numbers keep mounting every day. So we must have ceasefire. We must have the protection people need. So that's the first thing. And of course, this whole question of peaceful and just solutions, the whole world wants it. We keep hearing statements that let's stop this, let's have humanitarian pauses. I am, of course, arguing for ceasefire. But, these are empty words and no action. And the international community should ensure that this is the will of majorities of the world. On this issue that you are mentioning, now there is one version from Israel and another version and sort of clarification from the agencies you pointed to. And I can say, the truth will eventually come out. Many more investigations will be done. So I'm not going to be able to sort of judge it as to what is the actual truth. Some evidence has been pointed to by the earlier speakers, Professor Alapat and Arjunji. But having said that, it's a very gray area. The issue is really, and if people knew that a wrong was happening, then it is morally, ethically, by journalistic standards and others, wrong not to communicate it. I am saying this in general terms. But the issue here is of what Hamas is accused of is what is called embedded journalism. Yeah. Now this embedded issue, this embedded journalistic sort of history is 3 decades old, and it is a problem. Proximity of journalists to military, to armed advances is a huge problem, because there you have news which is not just out of a sense of proportionality, but it's a completely biased situation. In the last 3 decades, we have seen this only growing across the world. I mean, last decade or so, every major war that US has been involved with, you have journalists accompanying them in a very biased manner. And when you have, sort of that being checked, and some people reporting on military excesses, you have the cases of Julian Assange and others. So there is a whole issue there. And I think this is something we need to, some of those are gray areas, as Arjunji was pointing out before me. But I think this is an area that journalists, society in general, but also during wars in particular, we need to examine more closely and interrogate and control. But having said this, let me also take this moment to salute all the journalists, the media which is there, the charity and aid workers who are actually reporting authentic information, who are giving correct information, who are bringing to the world the nuances of issues there, helping people out. I think that's an important work they are doing at great resilience and personal risk to themselves. And that is something we should sort of also acknowledge and, allocate at this point in time. And I think as the Committee of Journalists to Protect Journalists have reported, I assume roughly about 39 journalists have been reported killed. 36 of those are Palestinians, or 34 of those are Palestinians. And I think that's an area we must not forget, even as we all know, the world of journalists is not homogeneous. Neither is any world homogeneous. But let's also not forget that side of saluting and acknowledging the role that the journalists have played. Thank you, Viniji.
All right. Well, that's a great point that you have raised. Journalist Sudhakarji, the world, the environment of a journalist is not homogeneous. He has to, in fact, for the lack of a better word, ply on both sides?
Vinit, good evening. Thank you for getting me to your show. Excellent point flagged by you. And I must compliment all the previous speakers, the co-panelists, for having covered their part in a very comprehensive manner. Now, let me highlight a couple of issues in response to your question, heterogeneity and homogeneity, that you have actually underscored. We are in 21st century, and we have gone through this spectrum of conflict in your channel number of times, from pre-First World War to the present day, from the Cold War 1.0 to Cold War 2.0, and thereafter, we are talking of the human-centric development world order. In 21st century, this is not for the first time the embedded journalism has taken place in a military science perspective. The embedded journalism also took place earlier. It's a thing which is generally practiced by both the conventional as also the non-state actor. One of the perspective that I wish to share in your channel is that way back in 2006, when the Hezbollah and Israel conflict took place for 34 days, it is the non-state actor which had very successfully applied its IT dominance and brought Israel armies, the IDF, on the knees. At the end of 34-day conflict, the Hezbollah had already mastered the art of showcasing its image and showed as a predominant component in the conflict, ongoing conflict in 2006. And over here, I think we need to call out the issue that check, 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 check. The very ethos and the ethics of journalism is under a big question. I'm sorry, without meaning any offense to any one of you. All of you are established journalists. If this is what is happening, then it needs to be called out, and NewsX needs to be complimented that here is a turn of the time which has come in 21st century, that media, the Western media particularly, have to be questioned. They have to be highlighted, that they have been actually party to the problem, not party to the solution. If they're actually in the side of terrorism, they have to be called out and made accountable. Are they following the basic principles of journalism? If not, then in the international order, in the highest apex organization of the global order today, we need to actually crystallize the code of conduct along which the media has to be or expected to behave and operate. In my opinion, Vinit, if you are asking me a question about heterogeneity and the homogeneity of the environment, well, there is a blurring line. That line is well known and identified. I am afraid I must call out that the non-state actor, as big as Hamas, they have made the journalists to operate under duress, under threat, guns pointing at the heads, and they have actually taken the men along, and it has been alongside the operational activities. It is a pre-planned, premeditated activity which has taken place, for which the media, particularly these four agencies, must be held answerable. Back to you, Vinit.
All right, sir. Thank you for that comment. In fact, we have run out of time, but if these charges are proven to be true, it is a blot against journalism, and it is also a serious offense, which, of course, is going to require more delving in. And the Western media, including CNN, Associated Press, the New York Times, so will have to, in fact, reassess and perhaps even recalibrate their associations with some of these journalists. On that note, I would like to thank all my guests.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.